when you live through something that traumatic, other women oftentimes have the same reactions that I had, and that, desire to die. Women can often become suicidal after rape. Women are broken and they need something to push them forward. And you'll so often hear that those babies are what kept us going.
Paula, I have been so looking forward to this conversation. When I first heard about your story, I sent it over to my team and I'm like, we have to sit down with this woman. She is amazing. She has the most incredible story. So thank you for making it out here.
Thank you so much for inviting me to come. Super happy to be here.
There's so much to get into because I feel like you've lived lifetimes and you're so young. But maybe we can start, folks know that you founded a ministry, that you are a mom, your wife, but let's start just with how do you define yourself as Paula?
A person who loves life and advocating for life. Just a person who tries every day to get up and get going and make a difference somewhere, somehow, whatever that looks like, however God enables me to do that day.
I love that. And you grew up in Tennessee.
Yes,
right?
In Memphis.
Okay. Tell me about that.
I did not have the easiest childhood. I was conceived in rape. And
did you know that growing up, that that's how you were conceived?
I found out when I was 5. My mother had gotten into an argument with my grandmother, and that's it kind of came out somewhat in the argument. And
so did you grow up with grandma and mom? Is that kind of who was in the home, or?
Yes.
Okay.
And then, they had the argument, and I asked questions about that and found out in not the greatest way, but a very blunt and direct comment, just letting me know that that's what had happened.
And you were 5 when
Yes.
you find this out?
Much too young, didn't really understand it, but the way that it was told to me, I knew that it was something that, at least in their eyes, I needed to be ashamed of. It was not something that was okay, and the way that it was framed to me, there was something wrong with me because of the circumstances of my conception. I didn't understand what rape was. I didn't understand any of that, but I just knew it was bad and that I was bad because of that. And I internalized a lot of that for a very long time. It was difficult, and obviously understood more about it as I grew older and became more aware of some of those concepts, but did not understand it at all at age 5.
I mean, only 5. And we were talking when we were getting ready to sit down together about your love of creative writing, and you're a beautiful writer, poet. You've done a lot of writing, not just when you were younger, but as you've gotten older and now professionally. My impression is that you're such a bright and thriving girl. I mean, in school, you were in class, you had great rapport with your teachers. What was that like to go from home and having this revelation at 5 and just the pain of that to living and thriving as a student going to school? I mean, how did you is that one of the ways you were able to handle that feeling at home?
School was rough in a way because I grew up poor and without a lot of the same support and guidance that my peers had. So I didn't have the newest clothes, and I didn't have really necessarily clothes that fit well at all a lot of the time. I had head lice, like I was that kid, and got bullied a lot at school because of it. But so in the same way that school wasn't a safe place, it also was, because I was the kid that buried myself in my studies. I knew at 6 years old I wanted to go to college, and I was worried about getting a B. I was that little nerd kid who was so concerned about it, and I didn't want Bs. I wanted As. I was going to college, and I would bury myself in books. Books were my safe place. Writing was a safe place to express myself, and that really helped me deal with a lot of what was going on at home and with the bullying at school. And I also had, again, really great teachers and support staff at school and different people there who, came alongside me and supported me and encouraged me in different ways. And that really made a difference. School was a home away from home.
So you had this like crazy and painful revelation you didn't even understand at 5 years old, in a moment of anger between your grandma and your mother, basically having a fight. And you're studying, you're pouring yourself into your studies. Take us to your teen years now. And what were your interests as a teen? What kind of activities were you getting involved with?
Sure. I was still really involved in writing. I think at that age, I was probably more ashamed than ever of how I'd been conceived. So I hid that the best that I could. I still wrote a lot, probably more so than ever. When I was 13, my 8th grade English teacher was really the first person to look at me and call me a writer, and pushed me really hard in that direction. So thankful for that, because I really was lonely. And I think had she not pushed me in that direction, I probably would have found myself going in a lot more bad directions than I ended up going in. By the time I was 16, I had started attending a youth group at a community center in Memphis, not a religious youth group or anything, just a local, group of youth. People were just saying, hey, there's this thing on Saturday nights, you guys can come hang out. And I didn't have many friends. I was a lonelier teen, though not quiet. I've always been a talker and been outgoing, but just without friends, without a lot of that support, I was lonely and I was really looking for connection. So I decided to go to that and got plugged in there. I made friends easily and didn't know at the time when I started going that all of the adults that were facilitating that group, chaperoning, if you will, whatever term you want to use, were all Planned Parenthood employees.
So was that like a recruitment program that they...
I don't know if it was something official,
but
looking back on it, it definitely feels that way to me now, as an adult, because I wasn't naive to a lot of things. I mean, obviously I had been exposed to 5 years old, at 5 years old to the topic of rape. So I wasn't, a lot of things were not hidden from me in my childhood, but abortion had never been something that I had looked into or really had much of an opinion about. It didn't feel like something I would do myself, but I was completely uneducated and really naive about the whole topic. I grew up going to church, but it was not something that was talked about in the pulpit. It was one of those things, I think even still where a lot of our churches are, where they pretend it doesn't happen, even though we know it does, but they pretend it doesn't happen. They, just kind of sweep that whole conversation under the rug.
And when you were going to church as a kid, was that like with other friends or neighborhood families, or?
Yes, originally started going with a family in the neighborhood.
Got it. So now you're plugging into this new group at the community center. And then what comes next?
So it started off really slowly. The first thing that I really can recall happening was this conversation where, we're sitting around talking about different things, political topics that were coming up. It was 2008. So it was the year that President Obama was elected. And then, of course, took office in early 2009. But political discussions were rampant, and obviously in a very liberal group, it was a huge topic that was coming up. And I had like a tiny bit of political involvement before, but not educated political involvement. I just knew it was an important thing and wanted to do something. And I had been involved with a local Republican campaign. And they found that out. And I mean, I never really even understood how divided people were. Like, I was very naive in anything that could be political or controversial in that way. I was naive in that way. And, they quickly were like, that's
what
terrible.
Are you doing?
Right. Like, looked at me like I had 4 heads and 17 eyeballs. And they started down this pathway. And I remember someone asking, well, don't you support women? Don't you want to help women? You're a girl, like, you should support women's rights. I was like, of course I do. Like, Yeah, you're right. I'm a girl.
How can anyone, especially a teenager, say, I don't support women's rights?
Right. Like what 16-year-old girl is going to be like, no way. Like I hate women. I think we're all terrible. We don't deserve any rights. And the way it ended up being framed, it was this slow progression of this is what it means to support women and this is how you support women. And that always came back to supporting abortion. And they didn't mind when I said, but I don't want to have an abortion. It was like, well, you never have to have one. It's about supporting the choice for other people and having no concept of the truth when it came to fetal development. I trusted those people who had been hanging out with. They were adults that, I think in a position of power, you kind of automatically lend some trust there when you're a teenager. They were official, so to speak, and I trusted them. So what they said, I took, not lightly. I took it very seriously, and I trusted that they were being truthful when they said, clumps of cells, babies.
And did that conversation actually come up? Where they were like,
yes.
It's not actually a baby, it's just some cells, or
yes, they would always just say, it's a clump of cells. I can't feel anything. It's not a real baby. And I don't know that they were ever specific about when they thought it became a baby.
Well, that's the thing. You can't be, because if you acknowledge it becomes a baby, sometime you say, why not before that?
But where we live, there's a 20-week ban. So that really was they never really talked about late-term abortion so much. I think by that point, even they would have kind of scaled back and been like, yeah, okay. Just because it wasn't really... that wasn't the fight that was happening at that point. They were more concerned about getting people to support abortion in general for that time that it is legal in Tennessee. So it started that way with that slow, them kind of slowly breaking me down and getting me to say, well, okay, yeah, I'll support choice. The idea of choice is great because when you talk about choice, you can ignore the fact that you're talking about a person, right? And so it really started there. And then, they invited me to come along to an event in the community where they were tabling. They had a table set up just with information. They do a lot of recruitment that way for volunteers, but also for patients. That's how they get a lot of their clients.
And they meaning Planned Parenthood.
Yes.
So you end up after the community center volunteering for Planned Parenthood at their booth, and then what happens after that?
So it was that kind of slow progression, but it sped up some at that point. I went from just being the person who would be helping set things out to then helping lead these, tables at events and kind of helping run those. And it slowly grew. And then I was speaking on their behalf in front of our local county commission. When
they're like, this girl can talk, so now she's going to go be our speaker.
Always been a talker. But yeah, I was asked to go and speak. They wanted community voices, not just their employees, because it looks better when it's the community. It framed it better for them from a PR standpoint to have people who weren't employees speaking out for them. So I was asked to go and do that in front of our local county commission. They lost their Title X funding anyway. But
I remember that. That was the big political battle where we were so proud of Tennessee for redirecting Title X government money away from the Planned Parenthood abortion clinics to federally qualified health centers that are doing the more holistic care.
Right.
So you were signed up to go
on the other side of the fence.
Give us the money back.
Right.
So how did that continue to evolve? So at this point, are you still a teenager or are you in college yet?
I was a young adult, early college years. Yes.
So it continues, the volunteer work continues throughout, from high school into college. You kind of stay connected with the group.
I probably would have been, that Title X funding issue specifically, I think I was about 19, somewhere in there. And there were just issues with one of their employees kind of doing things their CEO didn't even know about, kind of authorizing, trying to run undercover missions very badly.
This is the Planned Parenthood employee. Okay.
Yes.
We've been undercover in Tennessee multiple times. So when I hear that, I wonder if it's kind of retaliation for,
I wouldn't be surprised.
They investigated us, we're going to go do something. So what were they trying to do undercover?
So after they lost their Title X funding, they wanted people to go undercover and pretend to, be potentially facing a crisis pregnancy. Go in and ask for a pregnancy test at the federally qualified health center that received the Title X funding they lost. And, go in and say, I need a pregnancy test and a referral for an abortion. And her goal was just to document all of these instances, have recordings of them where people were denied abortion referrals. And it was badly done because it didn't matter if they were denied abortion referrals. They knew that going into it when they were given the Title X funding. It was widely known that they weren't going to do abortion referrals. And her operation had no benefit for them overall. It was unauthorized by their CEO. So
there's just something she shared with you?
Yes, okay. Myself and a couple of other younger volunteers. And we were under the impression that this was something their CEO had asked that we be asked to do. And when it came out that, he had no idea what was even going on, it was just super shady. And myself, and I know of at least a couple of other people that kind of stepped back from volunteering with them. Unfortunately, not altogether with the abortion industry, but just kind of moved down the street to another abortion facility.
So you stopped at Planned Parenthood because it was kind of getting weird, and then you started volunteering at a different abortion clinic. So it was still in your mind, I'm serving women.
Yes.
And this is for women's rights.
Right. I didn't want to be involved with that specific person. I didn't take issue with Planned Parenthood at that time, just with that person. And I didn't really want to volunteer.
And then you're in college during this time. Where are you in college, and what are you studying?
I was going to the University of Memphis, journalism, English creative writing double major.
Very cool.
Loved that. The writing still was a big part of my life. But started volunteering with that other abortion facility called Choices. And it was at that point that I started a very pro-abortion feminist group on campus at the University of Memphis, and got into kind of taking their messaging onto campus. I was their, I guess, sort of campus liaison, if you will, and taking that there on campus and spreading that message widely.
Now, people haven't already guessed, you're now a pro-life speaker and writer. So what changed? I mean, as recently as college, you're starting this pro-abortion feminist group. What did evolution look like for you to go from that, and also these, difficult childhood, all the things you've been through in your life, to go from that to becoming pro-life? Right.
So it was a big conversion experience, and it did not happen overnight. I think people expect these things to just, happen that quick, and it doesn't, because the messaging was so ingrained in me. It started, I had made some poor life choices, and I got pregnant. And unfortunately, I was really excited about the baby, even though the circumstances weren't great. But I was really excited. I had always wanted to be a mom. It wasn't really how I pictured it, but I was still excited. And I unfortunately had a miscarriage pretty early on. Thank you. The blessing is that I do know God's purpose for that child's life. And it is really that it kickstarted my conversion. Because I was so broken by that experience. Again, I had never been someone who thought I would go have an abortion, but I had just been kind of brainwashed into thinking that it was the best thing for other people to be able to do that. So I was a person who really wanted to be a mom, and I'd just fallen in love with that baby. And I was so broken by the experience that I started, for the first time in my life, even though I had had access to the internet at school and at different places, the library, even when I hadn't had it at home in earlier years, and I had it as a young adult, I had internet access at home, but I had never Googled fetal development. So I had always just believed the lies that I had been fed about that. So when I lost my baby, I really wanted to know what that baby looked like, because to me it was not a clump of cells. It had been a very real experience. Even though it was still early, my body had already started changing, and I felt like a mom. I was already changing my lifestyle and doing different things to protect that baby. And I wanted to know what he or she looked like and all of that. So I started Googling it, and what I found horrified me, because what I realized is that I had been lied to. And the people I thought I could trust, obviously I couldn't trust them to tell me the truth, because that clump of cells was a person. There was a whole body formed. And I was absolutely mortified by the truth, and really started thinking about what I had let myself be a part of. I was not to the place where I could say I was pro-life, because I had been taught to hate pro-life people. I didn't want to, hate women and be a part of something that would be so oppressive. And, they had always told me like that side of things. They just want women to die. And I mean, it was awful, right? I mean, the stories that you're told, it's terrible. Those people are awful and they hate everybody. And for
So
sure.
what was it for you that brought you from, after having to experience a miscarriage? And I'm so sorry, because so many of us, something my husband and I have been through, and so many people of us, women have been through it. And after that pain and seeing fetal development, then you're on this pro-life-ish journey.
Right.
So what's the moment when you stop volunteering at the abortion clinic? You're like, I'm done with that. And then what kind of gets you all the way, I guess, to I'm pro-life,
Right.
the pro-life camp?
So after I had become unexpectedly pregnant and had the miscarriage, I learned life lessons from that. And I had, decided that I was going to make better choices. But I was young, I was 24 years old. I was still dating and going out with people. And I had a friend who knew a guy from high school that she said, yeah, he's a cool guy. And I believed that she had known him fairly well in recent years. It turned out she really hadn't. But she, made it seem like they had been good friends. And I kind of let my guard down. So I'd been getting to know him. And he just asked me if I would stop by one night, watch some TV. It seemed very innocent to me. And when I got there, he started getting really handsy and making moves, and I was not interested. We had actually had this conversation before. Like, he knew where I was at, that I wasn't interested in, sex and that sort of thing. And I got up and I was just like, I gotta go. And his roommate came out of another room and pulled a gun on me. And the two of them raped me that night. So I can see now how it had been a setup, but I wasn't expecting that at all. It was the farthest thing from my mind when I stopped by that apartment.
I am so sorry. It's unbelievably horrific. When you woke up, what was your state of mind the next day? And was there anyone you felt like you could tell the next day?
It had begun late on a Saturday night. I guess late for me is like 9 o'clock. And it went into the wee hours of the morning. And when I got home, I'm not really sure what time it was. Time's kind of blurred at that point, but I would guess probably, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And I showered for a really long time. I felt dirty and disgusting. And it was now Sunday. And I was a person that went to church every week. The person who I trusted the most was a female minister, a female priest. I know a lot of people don't have much experience with female priests. The church that I went to had one. And she was the person that I was closest to and trusted the most. And I felt safe with her. So I drove myself to church, still looking a mess. I was not put together. I didn't look like myself. And when I got there, I just found her, and, she knew something was wrong. She could look at me and tell. And we talked before the service, and she was like, if you don't want to be alone, like, why don't we go get coffee after church? If you can make it through the service, let's go get coffee. And I was like, yeah, that would be great, because I really didn't want to be alone. I didn't feel safe. I didn't trust myself and my own judgment, because I had taken myself to the place where I was raped. And I didn't trust much anymore, but I knew, I at least thought that I could trust her, and I felt safe at church. So I stayed, and after the service, we went to get coffee, and on the way, we stopped, and she got Plan B, the morning after pill. And basically the whole time that we were having coffee, it was really her going on and on about how I really needed to hurry up and take these pills and, make sure that I didn't have a problem later on. And I just wasn't comfortable with it. I had always thought that it was weird that in the same, even at my most liberal, my most comfortable with abortion, I always thought birth control was weird because the same friends of mine who are very comfortable with birth control and these hormonal contraceptives, if animals were given hormones that they were going to eat, they were talking about how unhealthy it was. And, like the chickens getting antibiotics and hormones and how awful it was that when we ate the chicken, we consumed these hormones. And there was always this disconnect that I saw that I was like, well, if you think that's unhealthy, like, what do you think happens when you take these big doses of hormones yourself? Like, it's not good for you either. And, I had always just disliked hormonal contraceptives anyway because of that. And I wasn't super comfortable with it. And again, I had been a person who said I didn't want to have an abortion. And I wasn't really sure how I felt about Plan B. Was it an abortion? Was it not? I was just uncomfortable. I wasn't super educated about that, but I understood how it worked. And I didn't want to take it. I just wasn't comfortable with it. And she didn't even respect that decision. So it didn't even come once I knew I was pregnant. It started before that.
She thought she knew best for you.
Yes. And there was never any respect for that choice.
And did she try to take you in for a report? I mean, did that come into the conversation? And what were your thoughts on that after the assault?
She didn't. I was not in a place where I felt comfortable going and telling people I didn't know. I didn't want people to know. I was ashamed, and I would say I barely felt comfortable, but I'm not even sure I really felt comfortable telling the people closest to me. I just needed to process it. I needed someone to know and, to be able to talk about it.
I think that's so important for people listening, because a lot of people think, well, why doesn't she just report, And there's a whole world of like emotions and feelings and fears around that for a lot of women and girls. Yeah. And even in the position to be able to do that is for some people not possible.
Right. It's easy to think that way when you're in a very clear state of mind and you're not dealing with the aftermath of assault or rape. When that happens to you, in a lot of ways, you shut down and you're not thinking as clearly. And very few things matter to you. I didn't know why I was alive, I wasn't trying to go talk to the police. There was a part of me that very much wanted to die, so nothing else really mattered at that point. And she supported that decision. She said, whatever you're comfortable with. And I wasn't comfortable with that. So I didn't make a report. I went to the doctor, to the gynecologist who I had already been seeing, oddly, who had recently taken a job at an abortion facility. I saw her there. That was my first medical appointment after the rape.
And did she recommend abortion?
People ask me this a lot, and she really didn't. She was very standoffish. I remember the medical assistant actually asking me to quote, "Do you want to keep your baby, Paula?" She said, "Baby." And I thought even in that moment.
So at this point, you found out you're pregnant, your first doctor's appointment, or this was later
So I
in time?
went to the first appointment just a couple days afterward because I knew I needed medical care. I had sustained some trauma and I knew I needed to go. And I at that point, wasn't even comfortable getting medical care at an abortion facility, but that was the gynecologist that I knew. And in that state of mind, you're talking about the very part of my body that had been traumatized. And that's not the time when you seek out a new gynecologist. I went with who I knew and who I trusted and who I felt safe with. But I remember her medical assistant asking me if I wanted to keep my baby. And I thought that was weird that the person working at an abortion facility would use the word baby. I remember that hitting me and thinking, wow, okay, that's kind of weird. And I said yes. And they really didn't say much else, but I had to keep going back for follow-up care for a couple more appointments. So at the 2-week mark and then the month mark. And at the 2-week mark, I knew I was pregnant. And then at the month mark, it was a little bit after that. I think it was closer to like 5.5 or 6 weeks. I had my first ultrasound.
And what thoughts went through your mind, and what feelings did you have when you found out you were pregnant after the assault?
I was pretty sure before I took the test that I was pregnant. So I really heavily suspected it because I'd been pregnant before. And I knew those specific symptoms that I was having were the very same things that had happened very early for me the time before when I ended up having a miscarriage. And I was suspicious of it. So I went to Walgreens. I say this is kind of the lighthearted, funny part of the story. I took the Plan B that had been purchased for me back to Walgreens and returned it for a box of pregnancy tests and
save some money.
Yeah, but the look on the cashier's face, I'll never forget. I mean, she just kept looking at me like, you're returning this unopened box of Plan B for pregnancy test. This is really not how this is supposed to work. Like, you're supposed to open this and then you wouldn't need this other box. Like, this is not how it works, girl. But so I got home, took the test in my bathroom, and just a few minutes later was holding a positive pregnancy test. It did not take it long to pop up positive. And I smiled because the person who right before that didn't know why she was alive and wanted to die. And I mean, I had prayed and asked God to just let me get hit by a bus or something because I didn't want to kill myself. I didn't want the sin of killing myself, but I wanted to die. And I asked him so many times why he would make me live and make me live with that trauma and that pain. And in that moment, I knew because he had a greater purpose and I had a reason to live that was bigger than myself. I had somebody else to live for. And in that moment, the redemption was clear, and I didn't have to live in the darkness anymore because God was creating light. And it was just, that fast for me, that light switch flipped, and it was just a beautiful moment where I knew that I was carrying that baby and he was mine. He was all mine.
How was the rest of the pregnancy?
Pregnancy itself, I had some complications from the rape. I had gotten an infection that took a while to discover. So for the first half, I bled really heavily, and that in itself was pretty traumatic because I had had a miscarriage before. And it was kind of like every day, this not knowing if, my baby was going to make it or not. I had a lot of extra ultrasounds because they were concerned that he might not be, that I might have lost him. And that was really difficult. And it was made significantly worse by the people in my life who, would call themselves pro-choice and again, did not support the choice I had made, who constantly, were pressuring me to have an abortion, telling me I was crazy and that they had no idea that I had been conceived in rape. I had never told them. And, they were sitting there telling me I was spreading rapist DNA and that my child would grow up, once I knew he was a boy, that he would grow up to be a rapist. But even before knowing the gender, just that I was bringing an evil person into the world, that I should be ashamed of myself, that my child was the spawn of Satan. And those were some of the kinder things, honestly, that people said. He's been called a rape trophy. Just horrible things. And again, those are some of the kinder things that people said. And it was horrific, telling me to take care of the problem, exterminate it, kill that thing. And the whole time I'm dealing with this complication and bleeding and begging God to spare its life. And they are advocating 24/7 for him to be intentionally killed.
And they are people from your community, your church, or friends, or just and people that know about the rape and the pregnancy?
On some level, all of those, but mostly church. It was mostly people from church. The people at my church had been my closest friends by and large at that point. And that was my community, my
Was
main
there
group.
anyone who supported Caleb in your pregnancy?
There were people, but they weren't. It's hard to describe it. People were very standoffish. So the ones who weren't saying horrible things, they also weren't really coming around and supporting very much, if that makes sense. Like they didn't really know what to think. They didn't know what to do. So there were people absolutely who, would occasionally, just say, hope you're doing all right, or, whatever, but it wasn't real support.
What was it like to meet your son, Caleb, for the first time?
Best day of my life. I was so excited that he was finally going to be here. And he was born, started crying, and I just remember taking him in my arms and looking into his face, and it's a deeper love than I knew could exist. Just finally getting to hold him. And I think any mom, it doesn't really matter what circumstances, that feeling of holding your baby and looking into your baby's face for the first time. And, I always say, I think holding a newborn baby, particularly your newborn baby, is the closest any of us will ever get to God until we go to heaven.
That's beautiful.
Pure, innocent little newborn. Yeah.
Why did you pick the name Caleb?
Caleb was a name that I liked for a really long time. But when it came time to choose my baby's name, and I really sat down, I wanted to be super intentional. And as I was looking at different name meanings, I fully believe that, being that our name is the first real label we get when we're born, I wanted to be really intentional about what his label was. And I wanted it to be clear for him and for other people. I remember looking up name meanings the first time, like on the internet, on the computer at school, around classmates, and kind of how that, in a sense, changed how we thought of each other. And I wanted him, any future classmates, like anybody that ever found out what his name meant, to know what his mom thought of him. So he has 2 middle names. His name is Caleb Aaron Matthew, and his name means wholehearted, honorable gift of God. It's what
Beautiful.
He is, and it's what I want him to always hold on to, that truth about himself.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
There are people listening right now, and what we try to do is invite people into these conversations that are not already pro-life, because we're trying to show the bigger picture here. And, they might be listening and thinking, okay, well, that's her choice. Again, that word. That was Paula's choice, and good for her. Glad she loved and bonded with her beautiful son, Caleb. We're going to show pictures of him. He is a gorgeous little boy. But, we should still let other women. Rape is so traumatic, and unbelievably traumatic. We still should let other women make that choice. And that's why we need abortion to be legal for those women. What would you say to them?
Well, I think it's really a multifaceted issue. It's very nuanced. I understand where people are coming from. They're not ill-intentioned most of the time. Most people can't imagine being raped, let alone being pregnant from rape. And it's a difficult place to be in. So first, I think, I want to thank people for their compassion and for their desire to help, but it's oftentimes misplaced compassion and an uneducated voice that speaks and really tries to speak for people like me, myself and other mothers from rape. And the reality is, the only major studies ever done report the overwhelming majority of women who become pregnant from rape choose life for our babies. We choose life, and women oftentimes, I know many people now who've been conceived in rape. I know many, many, many mothers from rape. And what you will hear all of us, the words to describe our child that we use, words like light, healing. We've been given a reason to live. When you live through something that traumatic, other women oftentimes have the same reactions that I had, and that, desire to die. Women can often become suicidal after rape. Women are broken, and they need something to push them forward. And you'll so often hear that those babies are what kept us going. I mean, you also have to think about the fact that, if you today were sitting here and found out that your father committed a crime, we wouldn't have a right to kill you because your father committed a crime. And it's the same thing. I hear people who would describe themselves as pro-life all the time make rape exceptions. I'm not an exception, and my child is not an exception. If you look at an ultrasound picture, I shared this on my Facebook page not long ago, an ultrasound picture of my 3-year-old and of this baby, side by side at the same gestational age. And I asked people if they could tell me which baby was conceived in rape, and no one could. And if you could, it was only because you had seen the ultrasound picture at a different time, but there's no difference. A person is a person. And the circumstances of our conception, I don't know how you were conceived. You could have been conceived at home. You could have been conceived on a vacation in the back of a Chevy. I don't know. And it doesn't matter because you're you. You are a person. You have inherent worth and dignity.
Pretty sure I was conceived in Boston, according to my parents. But no, it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, we don't go around asking people how they were conceived so we can determine their value. It's a fallacy to apply that here. It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter how someone came to be. Ultimately, all of us started the exact same way. We started with God saying we were needed in the world. And that's really all that matters. We get our inherent worth and dignity just by being a person. And we're no different based on something as trivial as how we are conceived. My child is here. So many women's children are here and are a living testament to their healing power after rape, just by being here. And even women who, become pregnant from rape and start out, maybe not having great feelings toward their babies, those same studies, the only major studies ever done by Dr. David Reardon, Dr. Sandra McWhorn, they all say by the time that their babies are born, they are so happy, nearly every single one, so happy that those babies are there.
It's incredible because the kind of mainstream talking point, and you put it so beautifully, doesn't matter your conception, you are a person, you have worth, the same worth as anyone else. And that talking point, I think we translate the horror of the trauma of the rape onto the baby. And it's and not even the woman who is in the position of being the victim of that rape, it's people around her, like the people at your church or friends that you've had, and in their minds, it's so horrible. And so it's the weight of that punishment and the horror is placed on the pregnancy instead of on the oppressor, instead of on the one who's actually responsible for the assault.
Right. The Supreme Court actually has ruled that giving rapists the death penalty constitutes cruel and unusual punishment, which I find so ironic, given that our culture would then say an innocent child should receive the death penalty just because genetically they are related to someone who is a rapist.
So this has clearly sparked your passion. I mean, you have this beautiful boy. Now you have your second baby. You got married last year.
Yes.
Met the love of your life. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you started your own ministry, Hope After Rape Conception. And I'd love for folks to hear more about that and how they can support you.
Absolutely. So originally it started out as a group of one individual conceived in rape and a couple moms who had become pregnant from rape. And they started this little group, and it kind of went dormant. Everyone got busy, went dormant. Nothing was really happening with that. I was given permission to use the name and continue the work that had briefly been started. And last year, incorporated it as a nonprofit, 501c3. Our mission, simply put, is to assist mothers from rape and their children. And, that can look very different depending on what individual needs are. We have a lot of goals for the future, and hopefully one day we'll be able to grow into that vision that I have. Right now, we've helped clients get legal referrals, helped support them, help financially, with different resources. We've connected a lot with other great pro-life resources that are able to help do things that we aren't set up to do yet, but would one day like to be. But one of our biggest ways that we can help people and often do is just through support. It's through knowing someone who's been there and gone through that before, knowing the unique challenges that come with it. I mean, anytime you face something that's a little unusual, it's always nice to have someone who's been there and walked that path before you. We do that. We do a lot of work legislatively, trying to get bills passed that use the same language that passed in 2015 in the Federal Rape Survivor Child Custody Act to protect all families impacted by rape, conception, moms, children, and their extended families from having to share custody with rapists. That's one of the arguments that I hear all the time from people. Well, you're going to force a woman to bring this baby into the world, and then she's going to have to share custody with her rapist. And no. We are working on that.
That's a big issue, and that's awesome that you're working.
Yes.
I remember you've mentioned before, too, that one of the challenges with reporting the perpetrator is now
there's
he
a
finds out
paper
about
trail.
Yeah, there's a paper trail, and he could potentially try to claim custody.
Oftentimes,
and that has happened and does happen.
Yes, oftentimes the legal cases spark the custody battles, and it's not even that they want their access to their biologically fathered children. It's that they want to continue victimizing that woman. And the same thing happens when women apply for government assistance. If you're applying for food stamps or WIC or it doesn't happen as much with Medicaid, but it's more the additional programs, those assistance for needy family programs that can also offer cash assistance and things that these women absolutely need and deserve access to. They didn't sign up for single motherhood. They wound up there, and they need that assistance. And when they go to apply for it, the process involves being asked to name the father of the child. And why states do that is so that they can then go after fathers to recover some of the money. So we all understand why this process exists, because men shouldn't be fathering children and not paying for anything.
Paternity, yeah.
Right. I mean, they have responsibilities. However, in these cases, when women are forced to name their assailants, that often also sparks these custody cases. So we've had that a lot with our clients, unfortunately, where that has come up, and in states will have something called, or at least similar to, a good cause clause, where if you can show like medical records or anything like that, showing them like, hey, I was raped, this happened, that in theory they're not supposed to then go after that father. They protect you. But I can speak from experience. When my son was an infant and we were struggling, trying to apply for those programs, the caseworker that I had flat told me on the phone, I'm not going to do that. That's a lot of paperwork. Like, you just need to name the father. And, I told her, I was like, I don't have a name for you. And she said, well, I was applying for multiple things at one time. And she said, for this specific program, you're going to have to name the father. And if you can't, you're going to be listed as uncooperative. And when that happens, you're going to be marked as uncooperative on everything, and you're going to lose eligibility for all these programs for a minimum of 2 years. So I was threatened. I ended up just not applying for that program at all because I was scared. I mean, and it's just a case of that person didn't want to have to do extra work. And that happens far too often. And
where did you find the support? I mean, you have a newborn, you're on your own.
I was
so difficult.
I was really blessed to connect with other pro-life people and pro-life organizations and get plugged in. And I started, being connected with others who had walked this path before and were doing similar work. And really just, I know firsthand the value of connecting with someone who's been there before and who understands, that the first time I sat in a room filled entirely with mothers from rape and people conceived in rape, it was one of the most exhilarating experiences of my life, because at that point, it was the first time in my life as a person conceived in rape, even, not even just as a mother from rape, but even as a person conceived in rape, where I had sat in a room and I didn't have to wonder if someone found out about how I was conceived, how they would, judge me or think of me. I didn't have to wonder if they would think differently of me or hate me instantly or think that I had something to be ashamed of, because I didn't. And it was through that process of having my son and seeing him and getting to know other people and, really deciding. People ask me a lot, aren't you afraid about, speaking out? And the truth is no, because it was in speaking out that I lost the shame. I stopped being afraid and I stopped being ashamed. And that's what we try to give our clients now. It's what I try to give my son. And it's the same dignity that I took back for myself that I hope to pass to him, to our clients, to their children. That ability to see yourself as worthy and as having value. And my child taught me that, and the people that I was blessed to encounter in the pro-life movement taught me that. And, that was really when I saw what true choice looks like. Choice looks like choosing joy in adversity, and choice looks like doing hard things and smiling anyway. And choice looks like passing the lessons you've learned down to other people. We all make choices every day. We don't need to choose to kill other people to be happy or to have freedom or to be empowered. We can be empowered by taking the life that we've been given and choosing the right path forward then on.
You are an inspiration, Paula. And just so grateful for your voice, your brave and beautiful voice, and for your beautiful family. How can people support you?
Yes, so you can find us at hopeafterrapeconception.org, and people are welcome to donate at any time. We always welcome that, just to be able to better serve our clients. But one of the biggest things that I think might be, people always know they can donate to a nonprofit, but one of the biggest needs we have right now, if you are or know of a therapist or an attorney, family attorney, we're trying to really build a network of those in different states who are willing to work with our clients, either pro bono or at a reduced rate, just because they are single moms who can't afford, these cases that come up. And we would love to have a stronger network there to, as soon as we have someone email us and ask for help, to automatically know who to send them to in a certain state. So that's really, a big deal for us. Those therapists and attorneys are some of our biggest requests.
Well, I hope there's someone listening who is a therapist or an attorney. So please, everyone, check out that phenomenal website, hopeafterrapeconception.org. Paula, thank you so much for joining today, for courageously sharing your story, and for being an inspiration, I know, to many, many other people. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.